afternoon from London. I'm Andrew Budd, the Global Chair of the Mobile Ecosystem Forum, the MEF, and you're joining us today for our webinar on AI regulation, understanding the real challenges, understanding the real opportunities. We're joined today by an extremely distinguished panel of expert speakers. To begin with, I'll ask them to introduce themselves and then to give a very brief deck summarizing their views and ideas, which will give you an overview of their perspective on this very complex and interesting topic, following which we will then have an open discussion on through the various issues that are raised, and you'll get the opportunity to ask questions along the way. You'll notice that there is the Q&A box at the bottom in your control panel. You are welcome at any time while the speakers are speaking to ask a question, and I will endeavour to pose them to the panel towards the back half of the webinar so that we can address the issues that you see as being those that need discussing. Let me begin, therefore, by asking our panelists to introduce themselves and to present their deck, and we'll start with Serafino Abate. Serafino.
Thank you, Andrew. Good afternoon, everybody, which is today connected and joining us for this, what we hope will be a very interesting discussion. So something about myself quickly. I'm more than 15 years been working as an expert in economic regulation and competition policy for telecom and digital markets. And I worked both as a regulator in the industry and as a consultant in both national and international organizations. And I'm currently advising the MEF Ecosystem Forum on regulatory matters and helping them define the areas that they want to take forward as a group. I will start with my deck, a couple of slides just to frame the discussion and throw a couple of the way I see the issue, which is obviously a very, at the same time, complex and fascinating area. I think there are essentially a sort of like a tripartite kind of problem, regulating artificial intelligence and making sure that the regulation, I think, is essential to enable a lot of the market application. And I think this is also something that is becoming quite clear. Without clear rules, we will not be able to grasp the full opportunities of AI. There are some ethical principles to consider. There is a lot of regulation around the inputs, for example, all the rules that govern access to data and privacy, and there is output regulation. And broadly speaking, I think there is a sort of series of questions that if you combine those three elements, you have to address. How do we protect consumers from harmful application? What should be the red lines in terms of AI application? Who should enforce the rule? And so issues around governance, and how we design ethical AI, and how we finally balance all the different risks and opportunities. Next. So I think at the moment, the things are moving. So regulation, there is, obviously people are quite keen to set some rules. And things are happening. AI applications are being developed. AI systems are being applied to a variety of sectors. And as a result of that, different entities are engaging with the issue of AI regulation. At the moment, there is, if you take out the sort of like regulation of access to data and privacy, which has been driven by the sort of like in the by European Union, and but generally is a government initiative, you have a lot of self-regulation happening, whether that is through, and that then has taken so far different forms. So one of the forms we have seen is AI design principles, so organization coming together under different sort of like approaches and try to come up with a kind of like industry-led code of conduct for an open and transparent AI system. So the example I have here on the slide is that of OpenAI, which is an American organization set up in 2016, which comprises quite a lot of interesting organizations, some of the big platforms, also academia, and they've been quite keen to sort of like, their mission is actually, as they say, discovering and enacting the path to safe artificial general intelligence. So the declared goal is actually to set rules that can be adopted by the industry on the basis of recommendation that can then lead to a safe artificial intelligence. And recently, you have, they published a paper in April this year toward trustworthy AI development mechanisms for supporting verifiable claims that touches on the issue of verifiability and explainability that we will touch upon and expand on later. And it's very interesting because they frame the issue around 3 categories. So institutional mechanism, so how you approach who set up what and how you do that, software mechanism, which have to do with the coding itself, and then hardware mechanism. So there is also an element, this is also an interesting aspect, you know, you can also set rules, they are hardwired in the hardware, so to speak, that can lead to a safe AI. Then you have, we've seen quite a lot of organizations adopt ethical supervisory boards, the last of which, the biggest example is Facebook Oversight Board, which was announced in May this year. It's about 40 members, quite big variety of people, 27 countries and 29 languages represented, as Facebook owns sort of like website says, some big names, a former Prime Minister of Denmark, a former Nobel Prize winner, a variety of people, big question mark around how that is going to work, given that he acts mainly as a sort of like appeal jury on specific kind of cases. So it will not actually, it's unclear how much it will affect the way the algorithm that selects the content of Facebook works, but it will more at the moment act as a kind of like final jury, if you want. And finally, we've also seen sort of like voluntarily company coming out and saying, actually, you know, some of the big developers out there of AI systems saying, look, we won't do, this is our red line, we won't do certain applications. In the last few days, a big announcement by IBM, which says it will no longer offer, develop, or sell AI software and capabilities for facial recognition to law enforcement. I think big backlash for the way it's being used, particularly in the US. In the past, we've had Google saying that, you know, was dropping, they wanted to drop their contracts with the Pentagon again, because they would not agree on some of the ways their capabilities were being used, particularly in reference to military drones. And we've also seen some kind of like, you know, internal pressure, if you want. So in the case of Facebook employees, recently they posted, they have kind of like done their own revolt, if you want, to put pressure on Mark Zuckerberg to change his views and the way Facebook applies, the way Facebook categorizes and shows a sort of like Trump posts concerning some of the latest protests on Black Lives Matter. So these are sort of like some example of what's happening now, and I'm sure we will expand more later.
That was very interesting, Serafino. Thank you very much indeed. Next, I'd like to move on to Rafa Pellon, please. Rafa.
Hi, guys. Well, nice to be here. Thanks, Andrew and MEF, for hosting the webinar. This is quite a global team that we have today. So I'm a lawyer and a businessman here in Brazil. I'm working with technology, internet, media and entertainment companies on South America and Latin America. I have been working with the industry for the past 20 years now. I have seen like the first 2 decades of this revolution that we are living on right now. And I have been working with the foreign and Brazilian and Latin American companies that are working on the environment, all of these foreign industries over here, and how they're developing over time. So let's go for my slide deck and I can show a little bit more. So basically, as Serafino was saying, the thing is, we've moved towards this world where data is the new application. So if you have data, you have some equity and you have wealth. This is where all of the innovative companies are moving right now. So everyone is basically gathering, collecting, managing data, and how it can serve us in new applications. AI is not an exception for that. And we have been seeing like this surge of big data banks, which are the biggest technology companies right now in the world. So next one, Sam, please. As Serafino was explaining, and I think we are getting on the same information here. What we've been seeing is like these companies, these global companies, are like there's no one fits all solution, and we are starting to see by the lack of regulation that the only regulation possible right now is the ones done by self-restriction by each of these companies. IBM is just the last case that happened this week. We had other cases before. Whenever we're entering into some sorts of industries where data is too sensitive or its impacts are too broad or too critical, we are seeing companies either self-restraining themselves or some pieces of regulation. We're focusing too much on premises and do not do harm regulation. Trying to tackle any issues by the angle of privacy, as we have in Europe with GDPR and in Brazil with the Brazilian data privacy regulation. But in terms of AI, like it's still too early. So congressmen and lawmakers, they don't exactly know how to tackle these issues. And all of these global companies, they're facing impacts in a lot of regions at the same time. Usually when it gets to their bigger markets like the US or Europe, then it gets trickier. IBM is dropping the facial recognition technology because of the protests in the US and Europe right now. But we also have examples like this ban on lethal autonomous weapons. That is one of the industries where we're facing some issues with, which is basically public security. Next slide, please. So basically what we have is facial recognition systems being implemented either in the US. We have it now in Brazil since the America's Cup that we had 2 years ago in the country. And we have been facing issues like this photo of a woman that has been wrongly arrested at Copacabana Beach, the worldly famous one, basically because the facial recognition software was not correctly configured, and basically it recognized someone else entirely as a person who was actually at jail already and has been arrested 3 years before. So this is just one example of cases where it's not a problem of the facial recognition technology, but it's also an issue with the data set that is being used. And whenever we have any kind of bias on such data set, we also see problems arising. And the other one, which was pretty big later last year, before the whole pandemic we are seeing right now, is the biggest music festivals in the world just pledging that they are not going to use facial recognition inside the areas or the arenas where the shows are being held to avoid any tricky situations. They were trying to do it for public security reasons as well, and to try to avoid infighting, abuse, and harm to everyone else. But basically, it became sort of a Minority Report situation where people were trying to get fun and drink and listen to music and whatever we do in music festivals normally, and it became sort of a big brother idea. So this is also has something that stopped by public pressure on how to stop it. especially on like public areas. At the same time, we are seeing this surge of the computational power, where it gets too easy to have like to achieve a huge impact in like fake videos, and that is not fake images any longer. So now we are talking about producing videos of people talking things that they never did. These some sort of examples on algorithm created by the MIT guys, where they could animate and create videos of a few seconds, just with a couple of images of any person. So they've tried with even if Mona Lisa. So with a couple of pictures of Mona Lisa, they could get her talking and moving. And of course, this is kind of scary when you start to think that you don't need like any special devices, any broad computational power to get to it. Next slide, please. And other couple of cases is basically this pressure from one side of the world in the US and Europe, and at the same time, we are seeing kind of this new normal with other countries in Asia, specifically with China, when they're implementing facial recognition and artificial intelligence for all sorts of reasons, sometimes for even the most basic things like getting someone to subscribe to mobile services. So now in China, in order for you to subscribe to a mobile service, you're not allowed to have any kind of anonymity right now. So you cannot be anonymous by some prepaid phone with a prepaid plan or something like that. You need to identify yourself, and facial recognition will be used to identify you. In Brazil, we have the same case right now going on with the biggest mobile operator, but it's still something optional for the users. We can refuse ourselves to let our faces to be identified. At the same time, we have this lack of security that always shows up. The case for Ecuador is basically for public security reasons. They got this national database of faces and individuals. The database was built in a fairly short time, like 3-4 months. And by the end of 2019, the whole database was exposed online. So basically all Ecuadorians had their faces leaked to hackers and to the world in the internet, showing that like goodwill is not even something that is always enough for people to start this public policy. Finally, as Serafino was talking, like we have not even the public pressure, but we also have shareholder pressure. The case for Amazon in this last shareholder meeting was everyone, a group of minority shareholders pressuring Jeff Bezos to stop just selling their facial recognition technology to any police departments all over the world without any questioning on how the technology would be used. And at the same time, we have the Chinese being able to identify not just humans, but animals as well, which opens up completely different like applications and sorts of applications that could be used to localize and to trigger the targeting not just of individuals, but also other species on the earth as well, and the problems that arise with it when you can track animals in the wild. Next one. So because all of that, we've been seeing on the past months, like luminaries of the internet industry, like Brad Smith from Microsoft, and the CEO of Google, they are all requesting like the creation, the study, and the implementation of some level of regulation right now. Like it's become pretty obvious by now that we need some level of regulation. There's no one solution fits all. There's no global rules that could be implemented and it will be used for everyone. But at least we need some level of regulation some basic framework that needs to be studied, needs to be implemented, because it's getting too broad. It's getting like a normal thing to face issues on AI applications on an everyday basis right now. And probably this is the signal for us to start policing ourselves and to police how we're working. Okay, so leave it back to you, Andrew. Thank you.
Rafa, thank you very much indeed. It's a timely indication that this is coming to a point where action on the development of regulation will need to involve the full industry in a timely way. I'd like to move on next to Alexandre Del Rey. Alexander, if you'd like to introduce yourself and then briefly give your slides, please.
Okay, thank you, Andrew, to have me. It's a pleasure to share this debate with Serafino and Rafa. I am the founder and also the CEO of the International Association of Artificial Intelligence. That is an organization that are dealing with the enhancement of people to understand artificial intelligence and use it. We have offices in São Paulo, we have offices in Lisbon, and we have offices in Munich. And we are working hard to help people to understand and also to regulate it. And I think that we can jump for our set of slides, and I will bring some questions or thoughts that I think that it would be interesting for us to think about this topic, about regulation. First thing, we are in the academia, and also in the business world, we are discussing a lot about explainable AI. This concept is something that I don't know if all of you are familiar, but when we're talking about deep learning, that is the case. We have a computer that uses examples using training data to learn and get a function, a mathematical function that could identify in this sample a cat. Okay, then a user could give a lot of samples of images of cats or dogs or pandas, as Rafa was showing, or people, and the deep learning could understand some rules to identify this pattern or identify a single person or a group of characteristics, that attributes that are connected to one figure. And this is a problem because the way that the algorithm learns is very different than the human beings. And for us to understand and to share this knowledge and to accept or to agree with the decision that could be automatized with artificial intelligence, we need to change the way that it was developed so far. We need to create a way to develop an explainable model that we human beings can understand as well what a computer are doing in terms of identifying important patterns, like in this case, we need to have the computer saying, I identify this cat because of their fur, because of the whisker, because of their claws, because of some characteristics that we can validate the decision. Yeah, for an image, it's easy, but you can imagine if you are accepting if a person has a cancer or not, or if a person should receive a credit or not. And if you don't have this full understanding of what machine is doing, it could create a lot of problems for humankind. Yeah, and this is one issue that I think that is very important to us to learn about regulation. Can you jump for the next one, Sam? In this case, how computer does it? Computer gets a picture of cat, takes some piece of it, and gives some calculation, mathematics. And this is not enough for us to discuss how much is the distance of the eyes of a cat. We cannot process this information. And this is something that we need to learn. And if you go for the next one, please, Sam. We can see that there is a lot of effort in understanding and creating models that are different than the previous one, in order that a user can understand what is happening instead of a probability, why the decision was taken in that direction. Okay, and then this is one issue. But there is many other issues related to regulation. I would like to jump for two others. The second one is regarding, you can jump for the next one, please, Sam. The next one is regarding how you define rules. Like this is a competition for algorithms in order to identify a human being, a face recognition, and you can see, not face recognition, I'm sorry, it's object detection, I'm sorry. Yeah. But you can see the performance of a person and a performance of a system of AI. And you see that AI systems are getting better and better, and now they are better than humans. But what this means for a business and for a public point of view? We should trust more than an AI that recognizes than a person who is using a gun, or a person, a humankind, that a human person that are identified that a person is using a gun for some kind of violence. In which situations it's okay to trust more AI? In which situations? Or it's okay to trust more a human in which situations? I will jump for the next slide that you can see for the health point of view. If you get this comparison with health, an algorithm that identify cancers in lung or in liver or in bladder, you can see that there is algorithms that has a level of accuracy of 80%. This is okay. This is good enough, or it's not adequate. Or the other one that identify with an average of 65, 70%. This would be useless for taking decisions with that, or this also could help doctors to take better decisions. This is something that also need to be regulated, which are acceptable levels of risks and what are acceptable rules for public applications like insurance, like health, like security, like education. We need to identify good rules for us to use. And the last, but I think a very important issue is all the time that we automatize decisions, we are also dealing with moral. And we need to how humankind and how societies, how cultures have different ways to approach same problems. This is a very interesting experiment developed by MIT that's called Moral Machine, that asked people how they would behave in certain dilemmas, like in order that in a situation that an accident is inevitable, you cannot avoid it. You would prefer to spare young guys or old guys? You're going to save the elderly or the kids? And this is something that we human beings take these decisions in case of this kind of dilemma. But if you want computers to do the same, we will need to have this kind of discussion. And this is some of the previous results that they find. They find that it's people prefer to save themselves instead to save pedestrians. Then this is a thing that we want to keep this in an autonomous vehicle, or we want to change that. Or people prefer to spare people, humankind, than pets. You want to prefer that, or should I choose a car that should spare pets instead of humans? This is a personal selection, is a country selection, is a manufacturing selection, and these are all things that we need to discuss. And for discussing it properly, I would say that we need to understand what are the challenges and also what are the opportunities in the usage of the technology. And I'm going to finish my presentation and jump back to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Alexander. That was an extremely lucid summary of many of the challenges, some of which we will explore briefly today. I'm particularly glad that in your presentations, you've drawn out the variety of different different examples of ways in which AI is used. There is a tendency now for everything to focus upon face recognition, because that's clearly a topic, and two of you brought out the IBM example, but clearly there are many other examples, such as autonomous vehicles, such as AI drones and weapons, credit scoring, medical diagnosis. Alexander, you drew up anywhere, and I think it's important when we have this discussion that we understand that we're talking about any system which can make a complex decision, when those decisions will increasingly affect people's lives. And so the first question I just wanted to ask about was that in a world in which these decisions affect people's lives, the decisions are being made on behalf of an enterprise by an AI machine that may be provided by another enterprise that may have been trained on a data set that was supplied by a third organization, how should we think about the concept of accountability for those decisions? When an AI machine makes the wrong decision, or potentially makes the right decision, but it's a decision that has to be defended, such as choosing to kill a homeless man rather than a young girl, or refusing a credit rating to somebody, which means that they can't buy a house, or exhibiting a bias in picking out a suspect in a crowd. How should we think about accountability and the public regulation of accountability in this rather opaque machine that in this rather opaque system that we have? Who would like to launch into that?
I can start. Sorry, Serafino. The way we've been approaching to it so far is, and we have that on the data privacy laws all over the world, is by, first of all, sharing responsibility. So if you've used like a biased data set somehow, you're going to be responsible, like your company and the product will be responsible. You can then discuss with the creator and owner of such data sets later on. But before the customers and anyone who was somehow harmed or that has been impacted by it, this person has the right to go directly and chase you for any damages that have been done. So we have been basically adopting solidarity of responsibility, so shared responsibility. And also we've been adopting transparency as a tool. So we are the countries that have any sort of liabilities for companies that are working with that, they demand transparency for the data sets and the applications that are being used. They demand that third parties reviewing some level the algorithms and the data sets and how the tools are being applied. And they preview the rights for individuals to request what information such companies have about them, and also to review and update this data set and this personal information or any information whatsoever. That doesn't mean that it always works. Like the case that I'm showing from Rio is a fairly new data set being used for public security reasons. The system was working, the algorithm was working, everything was working. The only thing that didn't work was someone didn't update the data sets in time, or updated it, but not in enough time for the police to stop arresting the wrong person. And that's something that is going to happen whenever you have any lag between the update of such data sets and people working on the street to try to tackle crime. We will always end up at some level arresting wrong people, and that's the big issue right now. Serafino, do you want to comment?
No, thanks. Very interesting, because what you just said, it kind of like, it made me think of about, in data protection, we come up with the figure of the data controller. So which is a person that is appointed internally to have a dual role. First, act as a sort of like gate, contact person, but also, first line of responsibility externally if there are problems with data protection, but also internally try to enforce some level of transparency, making sure that the process comply with the rules and regulation and code of conduct and so forth. One element that I would add to you, just what you just said, and actually your example is very instructive in that sense, is I think we need to sort of like break down accountability into different components, because obviously, I mean, Alexandre had a very nice slide where the cat was at the end of the process, but there were different processes. There was a training data set, then there was a data set that was actually the live data set, then different stages of learning by the machine, and then an output stage. And I think so there is an issue of one, end-to-end accountability, but also accountability for the different stages. Obviously, in the case of the Brazilian police in Rio, it turns out the problem was with the data set. So who should be responsible at that point? Is it the AI per se, or is it those that actually should be in charge of the data set? So I think the challenge when it comes to accountability is also going to be, how do we make sure that we have the right accountability at the right level in the AI process, if you want, and then make sure they all works together.
And I think that brings us on to the next, to a very interesting topic that Alexander, you brought out, which I'd like to talk about a little bit, which is the question of explainability. I gave evidence yesterday to the British Parliament, and mostly joking, I said that if we're not careful, AI will represent the biggest step backwards in human progress since the dawn of the Enlightenment 400 years ago. Because for 400 years, humankind has been trying to find better explanations for why things in the world happen, and why things can, and how things can be made to happen. And there's a risk that AI and machine learning systems cannot, without explanation, for the first time become black boxes. That they decided it was a cat and it does, and we are not allowed to know why, which to me is almost the definition of magic. So it's a step. So without explainability, there's a question of whether we're actually stepping back into the dark ages again. My question, I guess, and explainability, of course, helps to drive accountability. My question, I guess, to you is, Alexandre, is how realistic is it, in fact, to demand explainability from systems that are creating complex and changing manifolds in 1,000-dimensional space?
This is a very good point, Andrew, and I will connect to both questions, because I think the accountability and explainability are all very tied. One thing is that we don't recognize it so easily, but we also, human beings, taking decisions a lot with intuitive or inconscient evidence, and sometimes we justify a little bit different about why we took some decisions, and not the reason that we did, because there is a lot of emotions related to that. And in the case of computer, it's a totally different problem, but it's a problem that creates some situations to us too. When we're talking about open a black box, this is a lot of people are working on open this black box, and they are doing it with some success. And I think that it's a matter of time that we can create mechanisms that we can understand what is going on in this transformation of data and this connection of data. It could reduce the speed of the development of the technology per se, but also it can create a much more trust of us, humankind, in this technology, and then we don't jump for the dark ages. And in the terms of accountability and how the explainability is important, I think that for us to develop very good regulations or even governance inside of our companies, we need to understand a little bit better what are under states, what kind of decisions machine can do, or what kind of decisions it's not from the machines, are ourselves that are inputting this value. Serafino was saying regarding the problem of the police, it could be a problem of the data set, but also could be a problem of how the police officers define the rules of accuracy. If it's 98% of similarity, let us arrest the person. And this is a human decision that are included in a software decision. And if you don't understand what are connected, and if you don't understand how the decisions are built up, we are going to have a many difficulties in order to first define regulations, second, to use this technology in the whole sense that it could be used, and third, to define the right governance for our companies.
Serafino, do you want to, you raised the question of explainability in your opening slide. Do you want to add to that?
I think what Alexandre said it's very important, I think, which is, this goes at the heart of trust on the technology, because without trust, we're not going to see, the full potential of the technology itself being deployed. And I think, but I'm also believe that, so do observation on the issue of explainability. One, around, you know, we are now designing systems that replicate our decision process, our processing, how we process particularly sensorial data, images, sounds. This is why particularly the image is becoming a big application now. Is the biggest rising one. And we are seeing a lot of backlash because we are not able to actually say, you know, if the police was making a decision based in the old days, they would have a bunch of photos, look at them, and the police would decide, all right, this is close enough. I think this is the guy we are looking for. So I think, but nobody expected the police then to explain, you know, are you 99% sure? Or are you 95% sure? And this is a big challenge because suddenly we have to put numbers on something that we have never had to put numbers on ourselves in the way we do it. But also, I think a lot of what, you know, contrary to sort of like the human brain, we can actually design the AI in a way that it is accountable and he explains. I mean, one good thing about AI system is that the processing power is vastly superior to the average human mind. So, you know, we can ask them to record every step they take in a way that then becomes a kind of like, you know, a trail of how they got to the decision. And I think the final accountability issue for me is I can't see in the near future anything other than humans remaining in charge, responsible for final decisions. I think it will be very difficult and because there are so many moral code decisions, and we have to see in a lot of cases how the technology work that, you know, it kind of like is a bit, you know, with guns and humans, you know, the gun doesn't kill people, it's the person that fires the guns. And I think with AI, maybe it's useful at this stage of development to think about AI applications as something that complements a human in making decisions, but the humans are ultimately still the responsible entity for the decisions.
So that's interesting because on the one hand, GDPR, which regulates many far more aspects of AI than perhaps is commonly known. One of the things that GDPR says is that in the case of automated decision making, people should always have the right of recourse to a human being in the event that that it has a negative effect upon them or they dispute it. So European regulation automatically makes that. On the other hand, in the area of face verification, for example, experiments done in 2014 measured the accuracy of passport officers at recognizing people compared to their passport photos. And we now find that face verification technology is about 100 times better. So the only thing that introducing a person into this loop does is to measure the performance of the person. It doesn't actually change the outcomes. It doesn't change the outcomes necessarily very significantly. It just measures how good the human reviewer is rather than changing it. So we have a bit of a dichotomy there, that where machines get so much better than people, introducing people can on the other hand create confusion. On the other hand, one of the questions that we've been asked is what can be done to better convince the public that AI-based findings can be trusted, and for that reason alone, maybe the introduction of human beings is an important social requirement rather than a performance requirement. Let's move on to the topic of regulation. In my 20 years with the MEF, regulation has been a central part of our role, and in many cases, in many parts of the world, including in Brazil, but in many other areas in Europe as well, in the Far East, in America, we have played a very important role in helping to provide a balanced approach to the formation of regulations, with contributions all the way along the ecosystem, rather than driven by any one chain in the value, one link in the value chain. That's one of our key distinguishing characteristics. So this webinar is part of a new stream of activity from MEF that began at what should have been Mobile World Congress in February. And the question of, well, how should regulation in this area proceed, and how can MEF contribute, is, I think, an important area to focus on. One of the aspects of regulation is that we've seen regulation address four separate areas, and I'd be interested in your views as to where the balance should lie in AI. Typically, we find that regulation is designed to protect people's civil rights, that is, their human rights, their privacy, and various other things. To protect their right, to protect their interests as consumers, so consumer protection, to make sure that even if their human rights aren't being violated, their pockets are not being picked. To ensure that there is systemic stability, to ensure that society as a whole is protected, and finally to ensure that there is adequate competition. And in fact, interestingly enough, one of the other questions that we've received talks about how if regulation is done wrong, it could actually it could produce a dramatically anti-competitive effect by concentrating power amongst a handful of European or American technology companies, consolidating whatever biases and imperfections that those monopolists would have. So competition is perhaps in those four, competition is one not to neglect. What do you feel the focus of regulation in AI should be, and how the MEF can contribute? Rafa, let me start with you.
Thanks, Andrew. So my take would be competition regulation is usually done on what we call ex nunc, which is we don't regulate it prior to the surge and the growth and maturing of any industries, any new technologies. So basically, what the European Union, which is Margrethe Vestager, is probably the leading expert on it right now in the European Union. She's been talking a lot about just drawing the red lines on the sand. So in terms of competition, the European Union is studying what they would put it as like the red lines and where you don't go. Anyone can be inside of these lines and innovate and work. Usually, they're trying to avoid like a huge concentration of data in just a few companies, and they're trying to protect consumers. The other output we're seeing is basically like how do we promote some level of premise, like global values that could be promoted and could be distributed to every legislation all over the world. This is really, really tricky because we have different cultures all around the earth. So like what happens and works in Brazil doesn't work in the US. What works in Brazil doesn't even work in Argentina, which is our closest neighbors. So we need some like human values and probably some like really basic human rights, like the UN Human Rights Declaration or something like that for the AI environment, which basic principles that need to be followed. The Asimov's rules, the 3 rules for robots, for instance, come to mind when you start talking about it. It's pretty old, it's pretty basic, but that's exactly why it works. So we're approaching probably the beginning of the construction of such basic rules. Everyone who wants to be fair and wants to grow in all of the global markets at some level will need to follow those. We know there are countries that are trying to expedite their way and trying to get dominance over the applications and systems. But at the same time, we know because of all the media and transparency and hackers and everyone doing their jobs and examining how it works and what are the outcomes, we know that unethical or the ones who are doing any kind of harm, they're not going to thrive in the medium to the long term, because if they don't respect such basic rules, such human rights that we will have. So by the end of the day, we're probably going to be deciding if we want to favor humanity on top of some pricing or speed, and we will probably see that happening. Of course, there will be bumps. But that's why we are all here to learn and to understand how it works by the end of the day.
Thank you very much, Rafa. Alexandre.
I think that one very important thing that MEF is already doing is educating people regarding the topic. This topic is that they have multiple perspectives, and if you don't understand it, we are going to be unable to collaborate and unable to have public discussions that make sense. And this is, I think, one of the key issues. People to understand what are under discussion and how we should do in order to create more benefits than prejudices. And the technology is very powerful, and I personally believe that we can do many important and many disruptive things using artificial intelligence. And in this sense, I think also MEF could help in elaborate these main principles. I think that before we go and jump to regulate and to forbid or to allow things, we should discuss criteria, what we want to achieve in the usage of the technology. And when you define these criteria, what are the directions or the principles? And I see many great organizations doing that, trying to identify criteria before regulate or before trying to set things. This is a second important step. And for this, first thing needs to be done, educate. Second thing, discuss principle. And then I would say that we are going to be able to define good regulation that would protect us and also enable us to do things better. And I see the question of the colleague there that are saying that if we over-regulate, we can create a problem for ourselves. And it's different countries are dealing differently with this technology. And if you just forget about regulation, we also can create a big problem for ourselves. And then we need to find the proper way to go. And I think MEF can help organizations in order to have the proper discussion, to have the proper principles, and to have the proper application of governance and regulations.
Absolutely, Alexandre. Thank you very much. Serafino, the word to you.
Just to complement, I think what Rafa and Alexandre already put out there, some good issues. For me, I think a reflection, I think, on the nature of AI. So the AI, I worked a lot in the past on telecoms and the mobile sector, incredible technology, but kind of like an enabler, if you want, but it kind of like, had one purpose. It was very specific, which was to make, transmission and communication better. And we kind of achieved that. I think AI, because we are facing a general purpose technology, in the way that, you face in a kind of like, it's a even like one every 100 years, you could argue, this is the level of when steam was invented or when electricity was then, discovered and applied industrially. So it's a general purpose technology, but one that has the potential to become very pervasive in aspects of everyday people's lives, from the credit rating to, what kind of medical treatment you get. So I think we need principles. I agree with Alexandre. I think that the first discussion should be around principle that as a society we can buy in. We agree that, this is how we want our AI, our relationship with AI technology to look like. And this will help to create trust, particularly around some uses which, one big potential of AI is that it creates discrimination. You make better decision when you can discriminate better. By a lot of discrimination then becomes very intrusive at the least. And the second element, I think, is around how do we set those rules? And I think what we need is probably in the short to medium term, I agree with Rafa, in terms of seeing that there must be some red lines that come from the sort of like the public or the government. in terms of, you know, things that we should not apply AI to at the moment until we understand how it works. So maybe create regulatory sandboxes where we can apply to what we perceive as the more, you know, risky uses. We have seen application on the access of data. I think on the protection of data, I think we will see more regulation on data access, and that should help also competition and see a bigger plurality of actors, because at the moment I feel there are few, is really concentrating in the hands of very few big actors, the development of AI. But ultimately it should be open and participative processes where we see, I think there is for an association like the Mobile Ecosystem Forum, and more broadly for industry, industrial players, there is, I think, going to be a big task in coming up with voluntary code of conduct. They are developed transparently, that touch upon some of the issues we'll be talking about, the explainability, others, because the industrial actors...
Serafino, forgive me, but we are reaching the head of the hour. And I'd like to pick up on two of the points that both you've made and actually that the others made. One of the things that we've come out, sorry to cut you off, but I want to make sure that we effectively, what we've heard about is the need for education, and hopefully this webinar has contributed to that. We've talked a lot about the need for principles. One of the things that has always made MEF's activities effective is that our core objective was built around the creation of trust and confidence. That if we set out and say the objective is the creation of consumer trust and confidence in this sector, then that will give us the foundations for building and proposing regulations that may be sustainable. We invite all the participants to join us on that journey as we seek to construct, as we seek to educate and construct principles to provide trust, to build trust and confidence in an AI industry, which can then serve verticals across the entire mobile ecosystem. To all of you who participated, thank you very much indeed. To all the contributors, to the panelists, thank you very much indeed for your contribution, for your preparation, and for your wisdom. Thank you very much, and we look forward to meeting you on the next MEF event.